Alright, folks, and welcome back to the channel. I'm delighted to be joined again back on the channel by Tony Haggerty. How you doing, Tony?
I'm very well. Yourself? You good?
Aye, good. Good to get the best in the business back on, as I would say. Um,
That's kind. Thank you. Appreciate
but we're just going to obviously talk a bit about Celtic's season. It's been also a fantastic season. First question, obviously, what have you made of Celtic season? I think it's been a really good season in all four fronts, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think it's kind of been a season in three parts, hasn't it? Really, they kicked off the season, and from about August to November, December time, they were prolific. They were tremendous, and they manoeuvred themselves into a wonderful position, which would basically turned out to be the winning league position, wasn't it? So, and then after that, there was a few wee wobbles, wasn't there? There was like the League Cup final where they weren't particularly great, and then there was after January where they dropped something like 12 points, I think people were saying, or 14 points, something like that. But in the grand scheme of things, it didn't really make any difference because their closest challengers, Rangers, were nowhere near them. So, and then there's been the flourish towards the end of the campaign where they've wrapped it up, and they wrapped it up in style and stuff like that. So I think it's been a kind of season in three parts for me. And obviously in Europe, they were tremendous and unlucky to lose to one of European football's superpowers or heavyweights in the Allianz Arena. So, yeah, but I think you have to say that it's been a terrific season. 2 down, 1 to go.
Aye.
We shall see how that pans out. But I think they're certainly on course to complete the ninth treble, a record ninth treble in their history. And it'd be great to see Brendan managers also reach the milestone of being the first Celtic manager to win 3 trebles as a Celtic boss, but history there as well. So, yeah, but satisfactory season, I think you would say.
Aye, because he talk a lot. I think that first part we only lost 2 points, I think, until about middle of December. And then the League Cup final was a weird one for me because we won it obviously, which is the main thing, getting over the line. But I think anybody would say probably the performance level wasn't as good as it could be. And then obviously Tottenham, I think that led into the middle part of the season you spoke about there. Obviously how kind of didn't derail, but we kind of come up, took the foot off the pedal. To be honest with you, a lot's been made obviously about the derby, but and people are saying it might leave a bit of a sore taste in the season. I don't subscribe to it personally. At the end of the day, as you said, they're Celtic are kind of on for the 9th treble in that history.
I think players are human. Give me a second. There's something around my window. Buzzing noise, as you do. But yeah, I think players are human, aren't they? I think Brendan Rodgers touched on it before. There was a lot of these games they played when they were like 13, 14, 16 points ahead. And I think, especially when you talk about the derbies, you need that edge. See, when there's not that much riding on it, I think players naturally think we can take a dunt, we can take a hit, and in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. I don't subscribe to the theory that they chucked it and they down tools, but I think you need to see Celtic would never have played like that in any of the derby matches had there been a couple of points in it. That edge would have been there, that intensity, that ferocity, of thought and training and levels that they talk about. But it's hard to replicate a lot of that when you are so far ahead. And I'm not saying complacency crept in, far from it. Brendan Rodgers wouldn't allow that to happen at the club. But, there was times in the season where you felt that Celtic, were like, well, it doesn't really matter if they lose today or, but they didn't lose many matches, but they were dropping points carelessly, needlessly, and I think that players that, however far ahead they were in the title race, had a lot to do with that. The manager said it shouldn't, but players are human. And, when you're so far ahead, there's that thought where you think to yourself, well, one loss doesn't make the end of the season. It's not an entire disaster. But I think it was the performance levels. One in the League Cup final against Rangers, and secondly the January match against Rangers that really upset Celtic supporters, because they really weren't at the races in that one. But I think Celtic were playing to go 18 points ahead of Rangers or something at that point, weren't they? It was some ridiculous lead that they had at the top, and I just feel that day Rangers were well worthy of it. They played very, very well, deserved their win and the margin of win. But I do think there was something about the Celtic team that day that they just felt, it's there's no real edge to it. And the Celtic are always at their best when there's an edge and there's some jeopardy and there's something riding on the match, as you've seen in the past few weeks.
Well, I think we saw that last season. I think the derby games when there was, kind of was nip and tuck really towards the end of the season. I think there was, Celtic seemed to thrive in the pressure, while Rangers seemed to, it seems to get to them, whatever. But I think it's, you talk about obviously the European exploits as well. The big thing for me, and I think for the support was, right, we're paying Brendan Rodgers to come back and try and make a big dent in the European kind of scene. And to be honest, I think he's done that, because I think we were unlucky obviously with the draw getting Bayern Munich. It's just obviously how the tables kind of turned. But even in the Bayern Munich game, I just said, well, we're a kick of the ball away from beating Bayern Munich in the Allianz and taking them to extra time. So I don't know what would have happened, but I think European has been a success. I think it's been.
Yeah, let's be honest. The manager came back for nights like the Allianz Arena and Celtic pushing it so close. I've said before, Celtic got knocked out in the playoff round of the Champions League this season. Can they take it a step further next season? Last 16, last 8. That has to be your yardstick. That has to be your barometer of progress. And in the Allianz Arena that night was Michael Nicholson and Dermot Desmond. Now, this manager can turn around and say, that's how close we got to knocking Bayern Munich out in their own backyard of the Champions League. If you want more nights like this, then you need to back me. I want X, Y, and Z. He came back for European progress. He didn't come back to win a third treble. Well, he did, because he likes winning cups. But, that won't satisfy his ambition. His ambition lies at the Champions League level. And it's up to Celtic now to match that ambition, because Brendan Rodgers is vaulting ambition he has for Celtic, and especially on the European stage. You caught a glimpse of it this year, this season, and the wonderful nights at Parkhead against the likes of RB Leipzig, and then on the road against Bayern Munich, and taking a notable point against Atalanta, having been battered in Dortmund. So they did learn on that stage how to play, and they grew into the competition, and there's some terrific results. And I think that's the real yardstick. That's where you're measured. And Celtic holding their own in that arena against some top names was a joy to watch. But that's not it. The glass ceiling hasn't. You don't just hit a glass ceiling. You want to constantly improve, and that's what this manager wants. And I think any Celtic supporter craves that as well. Domestic dominance is great, but let's see how far they can take it in Europe. Can they get to the last 16? Can they get to the last 8? That has to be the height height of your ambition.
I've got kind of the theory is you back Brendan Rodgers or you lose him. I think, to be honest with you, because of how big his ambition is, as you were talking about, for Celtic. He's an ambitious man, and he wants to try and whatever he's the manager of, he's wanting to try and get into the best he can be. So I think it's we'll come on to the summer and a bit later on, but I think it's you were saying about Michael Nicholson and Dermot Desmond. It's pretty big to go at that and give Brendan Rodgers a reason to go at, right, I know I'm going to stay put here, obviously, because there's been a lot of talk about his contract and whatever else, but if they can give him reason to stay here and go at, right, we're going to back you to try and get us break through that glass ceiling at the Champions League level, then of course he's going to stay.
It's going to rumble on this whole, he's got a year left on his deal. It'll rumble on the whole of next season because they want to nail him down to saying he's staying or he's leaving. I think you'll see in the summer the extent of Celtic's ambition and whether Brendan Rodgers will talk like a manager who sees his future at the club or he sees it elsewhere. You'll be able to tell by the personnel that they bring in. You'll be able to tell by the manager's demeanour. He said one thing when he came back. He said, I'll be here for 3 years unless I'm emptied. Now, this is the third year coming up. There is no sign and no valid reason why you would empty a manager like Brendan Rodgers at this moment in time. So let's see if he's Dermot Desmond's man. So let's see if Dermot Desmond backs his man by giving him X, Y, Z in the summer transfer window. They didn't do it in January by failing to replace Kyogo, and the manager made his presence felt on that one, made his thoughts public knowledge as well. He said a club like Celtic should have replaced Kyogo, but they didn't. But somehow Dyson Maeda stepped up to the plate and was terrific and a revelation in that position. So they kind of got away with one in that sense, didn't they? Dyson Maeda can play as a natural striker and he's proven and shown that. But I think the manager was desperately craving a quality striker to replace Kyogo. Now, they still need that quality striker to replace Kyogo. So that's one that you need in the summer. You probably need another winger now to replace Jota, who'll be out for some considerable time with his injury. That's two. You probably think they would need a midfield enforcer. That's three. Probably think you need another central defender. That's four. Kieran Tierney's already signed and sealed, so you can't really count him. But he is a new player. He's coming in. So there you go. So there's 4 players off the top of my head, or 4 positions off the top of my head. And you would always argue that you're a couple of players short of a right good team. Right. So that'd be 6. The manager would probably want 6. Whether he gets 6 or not is... And I'm talking about quality players. I'm talking about quality additions. I'm not talking about projects or players who are for the future. I'm talking about oven-ready players go straight into the first team or certainly challenge for a position in the first team. So there you go. Off the top of my head, that's me on 6 players. That's half a team, more than half a team. Are Celtic board that ambitious that they would give this manager funds to strengthen and bring in half a team? Because that's what you'll want.
Aye. No, definitely. And I think it's important to reiterate the quality because, I remember Brendan Rodgers' first season and we brought in a bucket load of players, but they were all rubbish. I don't want to, but they were all pretty poor.
I would rephrase that. I think poor is probably the right choice of word. But I think if you play for Celtic, then you have a level of ability. And I always find it disingenuous and a bit discourteous to call players rank rotten or rubbish or the worst player you've ever seen. But that's just me. I mean, you're entitled to it. If you thought they were rubbish, so be it. But I just think that, everything is... People are so quick to react and quick to be judgmental. You look at Arne Engels just now, both him and Adam Eder getting it tight from some section of the Celtic supporters. Adam Eder scored 18 goals. When you look at that and you do the goals to minutes ratio, it's very, very good. Arne Engels is a young boy. He's only 21. Nominated for a Young Player of the Year. Didn't get it. Fine. But, there's a footballer there. And if you really tune in and you're watching these guys, you'll see that. Nobody needs to point that out to you. And if you can't see that and you're criticising at will, I can't help you. Nobody can help you. I don't know what you're seeing with those two then, but they seem to be bearing the kind of brunt of Celtic supporters, anger and ire and it varies from week to week, doesn't it? But and I was critical of Engels at the start myself because I thought he could produce more, not because he cost £11 million, but because I thought there was a very good footballer in there, and there still is. And I want to see him boss more games, So I think he's had his season of bedding in at Celtic. I think you'll see a wonderful Arne Engels next season because he now knows what it's all about. And as I say, Big Adam Mida has got the big game mentality. I think his captain said that about him the other day, Callum McGregor. He likes a goal in a big game. So I wouldn't write him off just yet in terms of his prowess at scoring goals for Celtic. If you get the ball in the right areas for Adam Mida will score goals for Celtic. But it seems to be these two players that seem to cop the brunt of the criticism at this minute in time.
I know you speak a bit there about Engels and I'm like yourself. I don't get me wrong. Players need to be criticised, but I do think sometimes the criticism is just a bit over the top. I think the two of them are, like, not targeted at times, but you go on Twitter and after the game on Sunday, and half of them are saying, "Oh, Engels had a good game," and half of them, "Nah, I thought it was pretty poor. Or wasn't it really up too much?" And you're like, "We watched a different game."
Yeah, you make your own mind up on these kind of things, don't you? And no, if you're like me, nobody will tell me what I'm watching.
Right.
By all means, you can disagree with what I say and my opinions in football. That's fine because that's allowed. I don't speak for the Celtic supporters. I speak for myself as a Celtic supporter in the media. Some people like it, some people don't. That's life. Not everybody's going to like you and like what you say. But nobody will tell me in terms of what I'm watching, myself personally. And I know what I'm watching with the likes of Anna Engels and Adamida. I'll speak my truth and I'll put it out there. And if people like it, so be it. If people don't, then fine. As I say, I can't help them in that. And I don't know what they're watching or what they're seeing. They would need to enlighten me a bit more. But as I say, because I'm 52, I've watched a lot of football. We're 53 in July. So I trust my instinct, my gut on these things. And I always try and write as honestly and with humility and with humour, as humorously as I possibly can with certain situations. And we live in a blame culture, especially football. Got to blame somebody if something goes wrong. Got to blame somebody. Got to point the finger. And I wasn't having a go there. If you think somebody's rubbish, then you say that. I'm not exempt from criticism. You're quite right in saying that. But what I won't do is just jump on some particular bandwagon because it seems to be the topic, the main thrust of topic on Twitter. You're right what you said on Sunday. You wouldn't have known how Arne Engels played if you'd have taken a straw poll from social media. The only way you could find out how Arne Engels played on Sunday was to watch him with your own eyes and deduce from your own mind, what you saw on the evidence that you saw, whether or not he had a good game. Don't know what you thought about Arne Engels on Sunday. I thought he was doing okay. But what I did like was Paulo Bernardo's cameo.
Aye.
So therein lieth the rub. So Paulo Bernardo be playing more games at expensive Arne Engels, and then start another argument altogether. Most people jumped on, yeah, he should be in the team more. Get him out the team, and so the manager gets paid a lot of money to make these decisions.
No, I've had that argument with myself. I've had that argument with myself with somebody. Oh, Bernardo, he's done more than 5 minutes. What Engels has done all season. I'm like, you just know that, isn't it? True. Like, let's get away from this. Like, come on, man.
I think it's people would form opinions like that. They're not saying it with conviction. They're saying it they're either saying it on social media for likes and clicks and hits. Because you're right, what you say. They don't believe that themselves, do they? And if they do, then again, I go back to it. I don't think you or me can help them if that's the case.
No, because because I said I watched a lot of German football, so because Engels came from Germany, so I knew which Celtic were kind of getting. And I said to everybody when we were first linked with him, I was like, right, you need to just calm down. I says because he's going to come in, he's probably going to, because everybody thinks you come from Germany or go to the Scottish League, you'll be fine. But it doesn't work like that because Scottish League's, I think, the pressure for a start. You're playing 2 games a week. He wasn't playing that at Augsburg, really. It was, 1 game a week. There's no really much pressure on Augsburg to actually. But he comes here and it's like, right, your Celtic's record signing for £11 million. And I said that, I was like, seeing modern football now, £11 million, for a lot of clubs is, for Celtic it's massive, but for a lot of other clubs it's no really thing. And I just, you need to give him time. And I seen this coming where it was like how's he no scoring every week, or how's he no assisting every, because he's human.
There's that wonderful phrase from the manager who told him when he joined Celtic, "You're not in a holiday camp now. 1 game a week." Brilliant, down to earth phrase to say to Arne Engels, "You've played in a wonderful league, but you ain't played for a club like this. You ain't seen nothing yet. You've been to a lot of places, did a lot of things, packed a lot of experience into your young age so far, but you ain't seen anything like this, where 1 game drop off is a disaster. You will get slaughtered and battered from pillar to post." And he said himself he found that hard to deal with. That ultra marathon that the manager spoke about from November to March, where it was game, 2 days rest, 3 days rest, game, 2 days, 3 days rest, game. He was just like he hadn't encountered anything like it. And in Glasgow, when you let your standards fall, especially at a club like Celtic, the fans let you know about it. There's no hiding place, is there? So if you're used to playing, as you say, for Augsburg, and 1 game a week and everything's fine, you're cantering along. You can't canter along at a club. It's. And the great thing about it, and I've said this before as well, the manager talks about this a lot too. Celtic players don't have to just be on their game for the likes of Rangers. Celtic players have to peak every game. And see, when they've peaked there for this game, they need to peak again, and peak again, and peak again. 38 times a season, because every team peaks against them. Or at least they try to. So you have to match that. And only so many players can handle that. And then you've got the cup games, the League Cup, Scottish Cup, then peak to massive levels for the Champions League, where the standard just, that bar. See that bar that you think's really high? See the Champions League. You're going up there. You turn me on? No. Because that's the demands of this club, right? You have a manager that demands that as well, who has instilled a culture of winning at the football club. Spoke to Eric Sviatchenko recently, and he said he'd been about a bit, and he came from Danish football. So, but from the moment he walked into Celtic, he was just like, wow, this is where you win things. That was his phrase. This is where you win things. And Arne Engels has had to get his head around all of that, and everything that you said as well. That this ain't no ordinary football club that you play for.
Mm-hmm.
A bad 15 minutes, people can be talking about it for the next 2 weeks.
I
mean, that the tiny minutiae detail where people will put up stats for the 15 minutes that you had that were, as you say, rubbish, and they will let you know. And so somehow every game you have to take that on your shoulders and take that mantle, puff out your chest and say, I can handle this. Certain players can, certain players can't. And allowing for the fact that he's the most expensive player in Celtic's history, just heap that on a wee bit. That's like Buckaroo, isn't it? As if there wasn't enough pressure on you. Here's that last wee bucket just to put that in your robe, just to tip you right over the edge in case you weren't, pressured enough already. But you watch guys like that and you realise that they're in safe hands with their captain, who's around them, who's very inspirational, and there's nobody more inspirational than their manager, who tells them to blank out the noise, because that's all it is. It's noise, it's bluster. If you've got ability, you will shine at Celtic, and you have all the ingredients to shine at Celtic. You get every chance. The platform is there.
Aye, no, definitely. And you spoke there a bit, and I completely agree. You need to peak 30 games a season. We saw a few weeks ago up at McDermott Park. If you don't, there's the evidence. And by the way, I liked your question in the press conference to Brendan Rodgers, because like last season at McDermott Park, he was fuming. And he had every right to, in my opinion, because I just thought Celtic that day they were really, really poor.
But you're allowed an off day.
Aye.
You said the word earlier, because you're human.
Aye.
They're no robots. But I think, and that's why I say that it's been a kind of season in 3 bits, hasn't it? Right good start, and then right up to Christmas they were terrific. After the new year there was blips, and then they got it together again, the past few weeks, and hopefully it's a procession towards the treble, and that's what happened. But in amongst the blip, there was days when you felt that they just weren't at the races,
Aye.
and you can say what you want. There was a lack of intensity, a lack of edge. Call it what you like. I don't think it was complacency. I just think it was that the lack of a spectre of a challenge from Rangers. Rangers weren't even over their shoulder. Just see that presence being there. That makes you. You come off a game and normally when you would play the same time, but most of the time you know exactly what result your rivals have had before you play there. But see when you come off, how did they get on? The first question, how did your rivals get on? Celtic haven't had that pressure the whole season.
Aye.
So I think that human nature and human element comes into it big time, where you're not playing with that. And I'm not saying it's a lack of focus or a lack of, because they are focused, they're driven, they're professional players, but I just think they'd manoeuvred themselves into a luxurious position by so well from August to December that the odd blip was always going to happen, because there are times when you're just not on it, and McDermott Park being one of them. And that's what struck me about McDermott Park, because he had that rant in that time when they came back to win 3-1, and he said to the players it was the angriest he'd ever been. And then I was sensing similar levels of anger. And by the way, and I've confessed this before, I actually made a mess of the question. I meant to say I'm sensing similar levels of anger, and I think it came out as I'm not sensing anger, to which he went off and won.
I was wondering about that.
Not the answer that I wanted anyway, but I don't know what possessed me to say I'm not sensing anger, but maybe because I wanted that reaction in my head. But I was sensing anger. He was just being a bit polite about it, as Brendan Rodgers does. But then he just went where I wanted him to go, because he had that talking about the whole kind of attitude and all that kind of stuff, and only they can answer that. And so, but it got the desired response, didn't it?
Aye. Obviously, going forward, obviously, as you were saying, hopefully we can finish the season strong. Obviously, we spoke about earlier how big the summer is, and you spoke obviously a lot about, how Dermot Desmond, Michael Nicholson and stuff like that need to give Brendan Rodgers the tools. We obviously spoke about it a bit earlier as well. What ideally do you think that Celtic and Brendan Rodgers would need to get themselves obviously ready for Champions League qualifiers and obviously just your domestic campaign?
See that word, Champions League qualifier, that's the most important game Celtic will play this season coming up. Right? A lot rides on that. You cannot go in with the attitude of the past. Remember, Neil Beaton used to play in central defence, that kind of thing. Right?
Callum McGregor at left back, remember that a few years?
Yeah, right. So your memory's as good as mine. So if you're going to go in ill prepared, then be prepared to get what's coming to you. This is the chance for Celtic to really cement their dominance and really make a statement. See, the biggest statement would be, see in the summer, get all your business done early. Those players I identified earlier, or the positions, go and get them, because the manager will know who he wants. Bring them in as early as you can and try and hit the ground running, because these Champions League qualifiers will be upon you before you know it. And see, the wonderful thing about going to America last season and taking on that calibre of opposition, Man City and Chelsea, people say it was a waste of time. It wasn't a waste of time, because the blueprint was there for what they did for that first part of that season. Nicholas Kuhn was on fire, and he kept that going. People were like, but can he replicate it against Ross County and Dingwall? He sure can. He was tremendous against Man City and Chelsea. So this is all part. See, for me, the build up to the Champions League has already begun. These qualifiers, it started against Rangers or before these last few games of the season. It continues into the Scottish Cup final, and it'll continue into the closer. I know players have got to get a break, but they'll be back as soon as you know it. everything has to be geared to that Champions League qualifier. That Celtic's Cup final, next major Cup final, if you ask me, apart from the Scottish Cup final, people will argue, shouting, screaming at the yeah, good Cup final at the end of me. Yes, I get. I'm vastly aware of that. I'm talking about major Cup final because you cannot leave yourself short in that. And I think, the club bumps its gums about having X amount of millions in the bank. I think the manager's earned the right to spend some of that. He's earned the right to say to Dermot Desmond, you were in Munich. Trust me on this. You can have more nights like that. But I need this. I need this. I need, as I said, X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, call it what you like, ABC. Right. And Dermot's kind of I think Dermot really trusts the manager and he would want him to stay. So Dermot would say, okay, let's do this. Let's try and get more nights like Munich. And they can. But whatever you do, don't fail at the first hurdle. And also, don't take your eye off the ball by what's happening on the other side of the city. Who cares what's happening?
A lot of chat about that.
Right. Who cares? I don't. They can do the thing, and what will be, as the famous Celtic song says, or what will be with. Worry about yourself. Prepare yourself. Arm this manager to the teeth with what he needs to sail through these qualifiers, not just squeeze your way through, sail through them without any kind of hiccup, and build momentum and hit the ground running when this campaign starts, both domestically and in the Champions League, and go into the Champions League puffing out your chest and say, I don't know why we had to negotiate a qualifier, but we did, and we're ready to take you all on again. Let the draw chips fall where they may. That's what I want to see, but what I want and what I get are probably two entirely different things.
If you want the exact same what I want.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what most Celtic supporters want. They crave success at European level, and that was a wee appetizer last season, and they enjoyed it. They got a lot of joy from that.
And even the Leipzig game, I've grew up as a Celtic supporter. I've had fantastic domestic success, but the European, people they obviously do it with Alistair. He talks a lot about in 2006 and we done this, and I'm like, I've not seen any of that really.
Correct. So how did you feel when they beat Leipzig?
I was absolutely, honestly, I was elated, to be honest with you. It was brilliant.
One of the best European performances a lot of Celtic supporters have ever seen, especially at home, and the way they played, and and then going to Munich away, probably one of the best away performances, top 3 in my lifetime away performances. So, that's what's achievable with a club like Celtic. And guys like me are old enough who were in Seville et al. That's what I want for guys like you. Because if your club's successful, my club's successful. So
exactly.
It's exactly. So the one box that remains unticked for people of your generation is the European box. To see your club go on a right good European run. Excuse me. And honestly, trust me, there is not a feeling like it. It's wonderful. But I've said this, and I went on record as saying it, and I'll say it again. See, if somebody was to say to me Celtic would get to a Champions League final, but they'd lose, I'd tell them where to stick it. It's not.
No. The disappointment would be too much.
The European finals are not for losers.
They're
for winners, and that's it. I mean, I want Celtic. I'm the ultimate hopeless romantic, but if Celtic get to a European final, they have to win. There's no losing's not in the equation. People say, but the journey's great. Stuff the journey.
The end game through that because I watched my dagger through that into he's a Rangers supporter in 2022, but then he gets to the final. It's just pure dejection, really. Don't get me. I found it hilarious, but
as you would.
But no, I think it's so important. You talk about arming Brendan Rodgers with the tools, and there's been, and that's what I've been saying to people when the Rangers takeover's pretty topical at the moment. Let's be honest, but people are like saying, "Oh, about the god of this," and I'm like, just focus. Celtic aren't going to stand still, or they shouldn't stand still. You need to arm Brendan Rodgers with the tools. You don't make that same mistake that we did, when he left the first time, because that was the reason he left. He left because he didn't think he could take Celtic any further. But I think you can take this Celtic team further if you give them the right tools. We've got all the finance that we like to go on and on about. But so, as you were saying, give Brendan Rodgers the tools.
And I'm not talking about being reckless
Aye.
with your fiscal policy, your spending. I'm talking about giving this manager a substantial transfer kitty. People want to put numbers on it and stuff like that, but I'm looking at the 11 million and the 9 million they spent on Adamida and Arna goes on Adamida respectively last season. So, if you're going to do that last summer, you're going to have to do it all over again, and be prepared to spend in the reaches of that kind of cash. So I don't think they should balk at figures like that because it's there. Just a question of if it's the right player and they want to do it.
Nah.
Clearly, Brendan Rodgers felt Arne Engels and Adamidas were the right player. People still, Celtic supporters, a lot of their own personal jury still out with that one. Again, that's their watch. I just think we'll see two great, not great players, but two decent players next season who could really make a bigger contribution than the one they've already made this season. But I'm looking for bigger and better because that's how you progress. And I always say as well that you can't get enough good footballers in your team. If you get good footballers in your team, you naturally become a good team. And see, if you're a good team, domestic success, goes hand in hand. And see, with domestic success, there's a fair chance you can enjoy European success as well. They all feed into each other. So, as I say, I'll let the manager decide in terms of players who comes in, because it's going to be a summer of recommendations and links. I always like speculation. I like links, but hey, I'm old-fashioned. I much prefer permanent signings. None of this linked rubbish and speculation and coulda, woulda, shoulda. Permanent signings work for me, to be fair.
You'll get linked with about 100 players and sign 5 of them.
Of course, that's the way it works, and that's the nature of the business, and that's the nature of the game that we're both in, and we get that, we understand that, and part of it's a game, isn't it, with agents and players and clubs and managers and all that kind of stuff, and they all do a wee dance. Let's put it out there, see the reaction, and see if we can flush out bidders and all that. It's nobody gets hurt. The rules, they get bent and twisted out of shape now and again, but nobody gets hurt. It's just it's football the world over. Always has been and it always will be.
In terms of players, also we spoke about Nicholas Curran, Tyson Maida. Obviously, the big emergence has been Tyson Maida being able to just. I mean, it's the season. The stats that guy's put up the whole season has just been phenomenal. I mean, I think he's brilliant. I just think he's his whole package as a player, pressing. He's always running, and he's added goals and assist his game now. I think he's brilliant. Honestly,
I don't think it's been a wonderfully popular player, a cult player and an iconic player like Tyson Maida at Celtic for a long, long time. I mean, just universally liked, by everybody, even when he's making a cod of it, right? And he's skying it out the park, and everybody shrugs their shoulders and says it's Dyson, and he gets away with it. Everybody loves singing the Dyson Maida tequila song, right? I mean, it's taken off so much, and I think there's certain players who, in the history of this club, have brought you joy. I think Dyson Maida's brought you joy in a different kind of way because you probably least expect it from him. So this season, when he stepped up to the plate and he's rattled in all those goals, you look at that montage of goals from this season. It's an incredible range of goals. There's tap-ins, there's headers, there's the close control in the cup final. Take it out a spinning ball out the air going at pace, and slotting it home. The chip against Dundee, all sorts of goals there, right? The falling on his backside and curling it into the top corner against Bruges, right? You name it, it's in his repertoire, and everybody kind of looks and thinks, where did that come from? You know where it came from? It came from the fact that the guy's a striker. He can play there. Just everybody wasn't mentally attuned for that because they thought they lost something really precious in Kyogo, and they did. But they didn't realise that Dyson Media would step up to that plate with the minimum of fuss, by the way, and just the ultimate and consummate professional and team player. It's just wonderful, and that's why he's so light. He's so popular in the dressing room, and I've also noticed in every interview, he always says, "I am very happy," and I think that's become a standing joke amongst the players and Dyson Maida because he can speak English, but I think he just kids on just because it's funny. But in every interview that he does, "I am very happy," which is brilliant, and it makes me smile. And I think when you get a player like that whose very appearance on screen in an interview situation makes you smile before he said any words, then you think, that some players just leave a special imprint and footprint in this football club. Dyson Maida's a player that people will speak about in generations to come and say to, grandkids, nephews, brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, whoever. By the way, you never saw this guy, Dyson Maida. He was brilliant, and he is brilliant, and he deserves every accolade that's coming to him this season. He'll probably win the Player of the Year. He'll sweep the boards at that, because nobody's getting near him, quite literally. And I think the biggest surprise was that Dyson Maida didn't run through and score at Ibrox on Sunday.
I was sitting in here, man. I thought,
in his mind, I'll give him that. He had other things in his mind, i.e. his wife about to have a child and all that. But I think most people just took it as read he was going to run through and score because he was having that kind of season.
I mean, I would even go if Celtic had ever had a player who's as much an athlete as this, because it's just.
Well, and that's what I mean by that kind of cult iconic status. It's reserved for special players. And, in your lifetime, well, maybe not past your life, but people talk about Larson, they talk about Nakamura, they talk about Lubomir Moravcik, all this kind of stuff. We'll talk about Kyogo as well, probably. But, I mean, out of all the Japanese players at the club, the last one you expected them to really talk about was Dyson Maida.
And that's what's happened.
And that's what's happened, because you thought Kyogo had cornered the market and stole all the limelight there. But and I just think his work ethics, he epitomises everything that's wonderful about Celtic, both on and off the park, I think. And to come from Japan and really ingratiate yourself into the culture of this football club, the fans. I mean, he's standing with a microphone after they won the title, telling you Glasgow's green. I mean, I couldn't go to Japan and tell people that if I won the title with Yokohama that the place was blue and white. It couldn't speak the language for a start. So I just think it's wonderful. I just think it's wonderful how this football club can get under people's skin, regardless of where you're from. Hence the expression, the Celtic family and all that. And it's the same with Kasper Schmeichel. Kasper Schmeichel's loving it at Celtic. Needed Celtic. Joe Hart needed Celtic. But my goodness, and I said when Joe Hart left, Celtic had the biggest non-paid ambassador for the football club for the rest of the time.
And he's still like that as well, man.
Celtic were like, yes, this guy's going to just talk about us in glowing terms every time he gets in front of a camera. And he does. Kasper Schmeichel will be the same. Dijsselmeer will be the same eventually when that time comes and there's a parting of the ways. But my goodness, what an impact! What a footballer! And you just kind of look at it and you think, and a lot of it's about non-football issues, his athleticism. He's selfless. The selfless way he plays for the team. This season, it's become more about his football because he's rattled in 30-odd goals. And everybody's went, where did that come from? But all sorts of cracking goals as well. But a lot of it was kind of not so much non-football, but you know what I mean? It's not for the goal-scoring prowess. It was been about the athleticism, the way he can take someone out of a game by just man-marking them. He's running, right up to, Brendan Rodgers, I think, said one time that the thing that pleased him was Dijsselmeer tracking back in the 95th minute, that kind of stuff. So a lot of it was not football specific. It was just things that he would do. Whereas this season, I think he's become the more complete player, more rounded player in everything that he did for Celtic, and deserves every success that's coming to him because he strikes as being really humble, and he strikes as being a guy you'd love to go for a beer with and test his English because he speaks more English than he lets on.
No, I think it was always there with Maeda because even I never really forget this. I think it was Ange's second season, and he was Easter Road. I don't know if you can ever remember it. He missed like a shot that felt like a yard out, right? And you're thinking how, but then just rattles one, and you're like rattles one in the top corner, and just doesn't even sit, just walks away, and you're like, huh? How?
And you shrugged your shoulders and said, "It's Maeda." long before the song came along,
But as you were saying, I think he's now getting the adulation that I think he's always deserved in his Celtic career. No, we're not just saying, oh, it's Maeda. We're now saying this is Tyson Maeda, who's hoovering up every award in Scottish football. Scoring Champions League goals, scoring derby goals. I don't know. He's done everything.
I think there's a real appreciation for what he does bring to the table, because in those non-football specific things, it's easier to think that you're not contributing, right? Just take that you're an athlete. Every footballer should be fit. Nobody's as fit as him, right? He is the fittest player I've seen in Scottish football for a long, long time, and he can run around for 90 minutes and beyond. But I think it's everything that he does. His crossing's improved, his passing's improved, his work rate, which was phenomenal anyway, has improved. His goal-scoring ability's improved. He's just a player who has ratcheted it up, not just one level, several levels. He's gone up several notches, and I don't think it's any surprise he's done that since Kyogo's departure, and also probably because the manager has said, "Can you do this?" And he's like, "What are you watching? Of course I can do it." Right? So, okay, go and do it then, and let it be a surprise to people who are not watching. And it's everything else. It maybe came blindsided a lot of people, but if you were watching him, you would know he had it in his locker. It was about, but a lot of it was the sum of the parts. Now it's the whole thing. He's got the whole piece together, and the sum of the parts are making that whole. And he is proving why he is head and shoulders the best footballer in this country by quite a considerable distance.
I've always said that he could give the JSL Bunny a run for his money. Honestly, man, he's so fitness.
Yeah, I mean, he's so laid back with it. It's like over the shoulders and kind of, it's what I do. And he's immensely popular in that dressing room, and he's immensely popular amongst the Celtic supporters. And I love that they've embraced someone else from Japan. Because these guys are taking a huge gamble, leaving everything that they know to come to a country like this, where we spoke about earlier, where the criticism is ferocious.
You just need to look at Haggerty. 1 minute Haggerty's brilliant according to some of our supporters, and then the next minute, and so it's
yeah, and that's a great example as well. Haggerty. Many times do we have this? He's the best midfielder in the country on his game, and then when he's not on his game,
he can't be bored. He's disinterested, and you're like,
his body language tells you his head's at the door, and you're just like, you know what? Just let the guy get on with what he does. You accept what you're going to get with Haggerty. When he is on it, he's on it. And there are times when he's not on it, and you throw your hands up and tear your hair out in despair because you think to yourself, you're much better than you're showing here. But it is what it is with Haggerty. I've long since squared the circle on that one. I used to get really annoyed at him and shout and scream and then realise it's just who he is.
Obviously, we spoke about recruitment earlier on. Part of that recruitment, how important is it that we keep Maeda? Because, I'd imagine he would have some suitors in the summer but the other thing I was thinking as well is, in terms of keeping Maeda, would he not look at Kyogo's situation and go like that? If I leave here, then it might not go as well. Because look, obviously what's happening with Kyogo in France at the moment, it's no went well. And I'm hoping maybe Maeda would look at it and go, I'm absolutely adored here, really, because he is, as we were talking about there. And he might go, if I leave all this and go to doing England and, trying to endear myself another fan group and all that, it might just not go as well. But it's a must that we need to keep a hold of Daizen Maeda because, he's so integral in terms of just Celtic in general and in European football. I can't even say it. We need to keep a hold of him. There's no getting rid of him involved in this for me.
I think Kyogo is your classic example of the grass isn't always greener, right? And I'm sure Maeda would be looking on at that and thinking, right, but you might also be looking at he's been in Scotland, he's done it, he's played at the highest level, might want another challenge, and you wouldn't blame him for that. But what I will say is, if you're seriously ambitious about achieving in Europe and making strides in Europe and progressing as a football club in Europe and becoming a club synonymous with the Champions League and getting to stages where, let me say the latter stages, but last 16, last 8, if you can do that and you want to do that on a regular basis, then you've got to build. And you've got to build when you're, on any kind of success that you get. Celtic have to build on last season. That's the platform. Build on that. You can't dismantle all that good work by selling or attempting to sell players like Daizen Maeda. But I get that if someone comes in and offers crazy amount of dough, then they're going to have a conversation. They're going to get round the table, and then it has to suit all parties. I get all that, but you can't get to the stage where every 2 years you're dismantling what you're trying to build. You'll never make progress that way. No way, but we accept that Celtic are a selling club and we have to sell a major asset to keep the ball rolling and all of that. Last season it was Matt O'Reilly, wasn't it? The season before it was Jota. Jota's come back. Maybe Matt O'Reilly will make his way back one day. You never know.
Is that a buying model now?
for a cut price fee, that kind of stuff. But yeah, so we're not naive enough to think that people won't be looking at what Daizen Maeda's producing and thinking he could do a job in our team. But until such times when they come up with the fee that gets them round the table, then it's, again, we'll go back to speculation, isn't it? Daizen Maeda tells you every other week, I am very happy. So we shall test that. And also he's got another kid coming, hasn't he? So don't know if he'd want to uproot his family and take them elsewhere. Maybe he will, but it depends where it is. If it's England, it's not too much of an upheaval, is it? But again, there has to be that interest. But I think in terms of building, Brendan Rodgers will probably try and make it abundantly clear that, he said this before, that by all means you can go. The door's always open if that's the way
Aye,
you feel.
Rodgers has been pretty clear on that.
If that's the way you feel, but you will find it hard to match what you get at this football club. And I've argued many times as well, there seems to be this misapprehension that Celtic players play for nothing. They play for the jersey and they play for the fans.
Aye.
When they're doing all of this, they're being handsomely rewarded.
Exactly. That's loving all your dreams.
Yeah, handsomely remunerated, but other people seem to think, but they're not getting as much. Well, of course they're not getting as much if you compare it to their
Still on about 30 grand a week.
are in the English Premier League and the money that gets poured into Germany and Spain. Of course, they're not getting as much as that. We get that, but they're not playing for nothing. They're not playing for the love of the jersey. And well, there is a bit of that, but it's not nothing. They are getting a handsome financial package.
No, because I said that to somebody recently. I was like, it's not like Arnie Engels had pictures of Scott Brown up in his wall, did he? Like, they're getting paid handsomely for doing stuff. And don't get me wrong, if I'm winning, I'd happily bite your hand off to be winning trophies every single season and getting paid for it and playing for Celtic. It's one, but for the supporters, it's hang with that.
But not everybody is like you and I who grew up supporting this football and live that dream. So if you've come from Japan, you've come from England, you've come from Canada, you might get a feel for the club, Denmark, whatever, right? But you always say to yourself as well, or people will remind you, if you're very good at what you do, people will come calling.
Right.
You might see another challenge in the offing, and I think most people, the only way you leave Celtics for another challenge, and that challenge comes in the shape of the competition, the league that you play in, and also it comes with financial recompense. But I don't think, and we have to accept where we are in football's pyramid and grand schema. Celtic are still what you would say a selling club, right? But they sell one asset a year, don't they?
Aye.
Every close season. But why can't they buck that trend at some point and just say, do you know what? See, for a couple of years, I'm going to try and keep everybody here and see where it gets them. Because I think they're in I think they're in a privileged position where they have a wonderful football manager, probably the best they can get at this football club at this minute. And I think if you were to make a pledge and assurances to him, we will keep everybody at this football club because you don't have to sell. See where you can take it. We'll add a bit. Then he would sign a new deal. But it's that constant need to sell one of your star players, and Celtic fans get resigned to it at some point, don't they? They were resigned to losing Matt O'Reilly. I don't think they'll be resigned to losing Dies and Maida. I think that would hurt them more than anything.
It would.
If that was to play out this close season, I don't see it doing that. But again, it's about how all parties feel. There's more than one party involved in any deal like that, So down to how the player also personally feels with more additions to the family coming. My point still stands that Celtic players do not play for the jersey. They're not playing for nothing. They are playing for the jersey and they're playing with supporters and they're playing to win trophies, but they're being
handsomely paid for it.
Paid for that privilege as well.
Aye. What you kind of said that kind of leads on to my last question. First of all, where does this season rank in terms of Celtic? And B, what does Celtic have to do to keep getting better and improving? My personal belief is what you were saying there is, like, you look at clubs like Benfica's players, teams like Ajax, or Dutch teams really, they're in the Champions League every year and they keep improving. I think that's the only way Celtic do improve, but I also think Celtic need to not be as charitable when it comes to selling players. They need to be a lot more. No, we want X amount for this player, or we're not selling this player because we want to improve. As I said, like, what do you think? Where does this season rank? And obviously, the season's not done yet, but and B, where do you think Celtic need to do it to keep getting improving and getting better?
Well, they're 90 minutes away from a treble, right?
Right.
So you can rank those trebles in any kind of order, can't you? Those who are old enough to remember the first trebles will be able to tell you whether they were better than this one or not. I think every treble should be, should be celebrated on its merit, right? I think there was a stushy created in the media the other week when a couple of words were mentioned about.
Boring and tedious, by any chance?
I think that's the two buzzwords I was talking about. Yeah, you canvass any Celtic supporter, winning's never monotonous, and they will celebrate it like it was their first, and they should always celebrate trebles like it was their first, because you know why? They don't come around that often. It's just Celtic's era of dominance has made it come around more often than not. But when Martin O'Neill's team won the treble in 2000, 2001, it was only the third treble that Celtic had ever clinched in their history.
Right.
The others being 66, 67 and 68, 69. So that was the first one since 1969. And that was the third in their history. So in 24 years, Celtic have now polished another 5 trebles off. And they're going for their 69 years. It's an incredible run of success. And so you celebrate them like there's no tomorrow, because one day there will be no tomorrow and that era of dominance will come to an end. It's natural. It's what happens. I don't want it to come to an end, but hey. But in order to keep that dominance, you do what we say. Because if your ambition is to be a club who is always in the Champions League, who's, perennially in the Champions League, then domestic success will follow. If your yardstick is to be a success at the highest level of the game, and as I said earlier, why not for once just say, do you know what? See, for 2 years, we'll try and no sell Andy. It might be impossible, but certainly start out with that as your base kind of line and say to the manager, can we keep everybody here? Can they go on a particular journey with you and this football club? Because we got here in the Champions League last year, we want to go there. Stay on board because we need you to help us push to the last 16, last 8. For me, that's an exciting for any kind of footballer. That ambition that you crave and you cherish for this football club, and it's achievable because last season told you it is. And you look around and you think, yep, there are some top heavyweight teams from wonderful football clubs. You watched arguably one of the best semi-finals on record.
That was mental.
2 leg semi-finals on record. 2 teams just at the top of their game. Someone has to win, someone has to lose.
Aye.
And you turn around and you say, okay, that's what we're aspiring to. Might never get there, but there ain't no harm in aspiring to it.
Aye.
And if you constantly aspire to that, then you will be successful because you're not letting your standards drop. The only way you find out how good you are is by coming up against teams of that caliber, and then seeing what happens. Celtic went out to Bayern Munich. They lost heavily to the last season's beaten Champions League finalists.
Aye.
But went to the Europa League winners and got a draw. You know what I mean? So for every right yin, there's a yang in terms of the Champions League. It's very unpredictable, but the more you play in it and the more you expose yourself to games of that nature at that level, you get better, you progress.
But you just need to look at 2018 with Ajax. They managed to get to a semi-final. I don't think it's out of the question.
and you'll only progress if everybody's on the same page.
Aye.
And if that page is that you do have to sell an asset, that cycle continues, then so be it. But I tell you, see if they are planning on selling an asset, whether that be Hitachi, Maida, or whoever, then you should be doing your homework right now. There should be a list the length of my arm and your arm of potential players, and I'm sure there is, because there's no excuse for all sorts of databases now where you can check out player stats and all that if you're into these kind of things. Are just, but I'm old-fashioned in terms of that scouting kind of thing. I just want to, I would want to see them in the flesh as often as possible before I made any kind of decision. I wouldn't base it on stats or spreadsheets. I'm old money that way, Just kind of, I'll use my 4 eyes to watch somebody, and if those 4 eyes are, askew, then so be it. That judgment's on my head, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's but in terms of success or season where you rank it, they're 90 minutes away from another treble.
Aye.
Rank those trebles in ascending, descending order, whatever way you
Sounds
want.
mental to say rank trebles.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's the best ever treble or it's the worst ever treble. I mean, it's all nonsense. It's all rubbish.
Media can call it boring and tedious all they want, but all I know that in a few weeks I'm going to my first ever Scottish Cup final. So
well, that's and again, that all buys into the hyperbolic nature of covering Scottish football. You're either up there or down there, and even when you're up there, people still shoot at you and say, use words which you said there. Football's about winning and losing.
Aye.
You have to show the same humility during both. So it's more palatable when you win, but when you lose, you have to take your dumps and take it, take it on the chin, as they say, and for the Celtic supporters, that hasn't happened in a while. Maybe around the corner, and you know how everybody felt when the season that shall not be named went pear-shaped right. So you have to enjoy this time. It's an unprecedented time in the history of the club. So when people talk to me about greatest ever treble, I don't see it like that. I just see it as a successful era, which long may it continue. You live in the fear that it's not going to continue. That's the thing, and you're always kind of, when's it going to end? And then you say to yourself, but see, when you think like that, then you don't enjoy it.
Exactly.
So you've got to enjoy it, and if you're going to your first Scottish Cup final in a couple of weeks, then hopefully I'll see you there.
I hope. But I'm going to wrap it up there. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Thanks again, Tony. Honestly, it's brilliant to have you in the channel. You're absolute pleasure to listen to. And it's an absolute pleasure. And hopefully we're talking about a treble in a few weeks. That's the main thing.
The pleasure's and honour's mine, believe me. I kind of feel humbled when someone like yourself wants me to come on and do this. So, and I have no problem giving up my time to do it because I enjoy it, and I was once the same person as you were, studying to do what I do now, and you're obviously pursuing the same dream. And if I can help people on their way, help them achieve that, then that's something that's close to my heart. You know that I've always been fairly open in that sense, and you know where to reach me. And that's important to me because people were helpful to me. And it sounds a bit twee and a bit crass, but you do like to put something back in. And as I say, I always try and help when I can. I think it's incumbent upon you to do that. I've been fortunate. Football's been good to me. I've enjoyed some wonderful time, still enjoying it. I love my profession. I love my job, and trust me, you will too, and you will maybe one day when I'm older, we'll reconvene, and you can tell me all about your and stuff.
But no, thanks very much, Tony. That's always appreciated. Cheers.
No problem at all. Pleasure.